Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we're going to be going through an updated version of creating a periodized hypertrophy training block. So I have already created a video on this same topic, but my views and opinions have changed on how to create a hypertrophy training block, and so I'm going to be going through an updated method of creating this training program. So first and foremost, the introduction of using sets to quantify volume has really influenced my programming. So thanks to Renaissance periodization and in particular Dr. Mike Israetel for creating these volume landmarks or these concepts. So we have basically three main volume landmarks. So the first one is maintenance volume, the second one is minimum effective volume, and then maximum recoverable volume. So maintenance volume is essentially how much volume you need per muscle group in order to maintain its size. Minimum effective volume is essentially how much volume is required to actually stimulate any adaptation, whereas maximum recoverable volume is the maximum amount of volume you can train and recover and adapt from. These are the general recommendations per muscle group. Maintenance volume is 6 to 10 sets per muscle group, depending on the muscle group and the individual. Minimum effective volume is generally somewhere between 8 to 12 sets per muscle group, and then the maximum recoverable volume is generally somewhere between 18 and 30 sets per muscle group, and this is a big range, and it's heavily dependent on the muscle group you're training, what exercises you're using, and the individual that is doing the training. So taking these concepts into consideration, I have some variations to how I create a periodized hypertrophy training block. So we still have the same template as usual, and in the last video I had a 4-week overloading period followed by a 5th week that was a deload. In this situation, this is just another way to do it, is to do 3 weeks of overload followed by a 4th week that's a deload, and I think this works well for especially advanced athletes that have a significant amount of training years under their belt. So I've split this training program into 4 days. The day 1 and day 3 have the same exercises, so they're primarily going to be quads and push exercises. So quads, chest, anterior shoulders, triceps, and some abs as well. And day 3 is exactly the same, except the order's changed. So the quadriceps will be more emphasized on day 1, whereas on day 3 there's a bit more upper body emphasis here. On day 2 and day 4, again, we have the same exercises, except on day 2 we're going to have more of an upper body emphasis, whereas on day 4 we're going to have more of a lower body hamstrings emphasis. So first and foremost, we need to fill in each of these exercises. This isn't a strict plan of the exercises and movements we need to do. This is just a rough guide. You can add the exercises you like and do as many exercises for each muscle group as you want, so long as you're staying within the volume landmarks. So for quadriceps primary, might just simply have a back squat. For the push horizontal, might have a bench press. Quadriceps secondary, we might just have a leg extension. Vertical push, we might have a dumbbell overhead press. Triceps, we might have a triceps push down. And for abs, we'll put a V up. So moving on to day 2, for the vertical back exercise, we might have pull-ups. For the hamstrings, primarily, we might have a stiff-legged deadlift or Romanian deadlift, RDL for short. For the horizontal back movement, we might have a seated cable row. And the secondary hamstrings, we might just simply have a hamstring curl. Biceps, we might have a barbell curl, and for calves, we might have some sort of resisted calf raise. Okay, so day 3, exactly the same exercises as day 1, except the emphasis is going to shift slightly. So our push horizontal was a barbell bench press. So again, barbell bench press first, it's going to get more adaptation to those upper body muscles because we are less fatigued. For the primary quadriceps exercise, we had back squats again. We might maybe want to do a leg press on this day. That's another variation that we can do. For a vertical push, we had the dumbbell overhead press. For the secondary quadriceps exercise, we had the leg extension, had triceps push down, and then we had V up. Day 4, exactly the same exercise as day 2, but instead of having our pull-ups first, we're going to have our Romanian deadlifts first. Our secondary hamstring exercise was a hamstrings curl machine, and then we had a seated cable row, followed by a barbell curl and a calf raise. Okay, so now that we have our exercises in place, we now need to periodize this training block so that it falls within these training guidelines. So we have a 3-week overload followed by a 1-week deload. So in this deload period, we essentially want to just be maintaining our muscle mass. So it's going to be within this maintenance volume. And then we want to basically start our first week at our minimum effective volume for each muscle group and progress in the final overload week to our maximum recoverable volume. So we're just going to program a few exercises. We're not going to do all of them because it's going to be a bit time consuming for this video, but the same principles apply to each muscle group. So we'll just focus on the first 4 exercises for each day. So our back squat, maybe we want to start off by doing 3 sets, and we might want to work within the range on this day of 6 repetitions, so lower repetitions and therefore higher loads. So depending on how strong we are, let's just say this is 120 kilograms, for example. In the following week, we might then do 4 sets of 6 at 120 kilos, followed by 5 sets of 6 at 120 kilos. Then in that deload period, we might do 2 sets of 6 at 120 kilos. For our barbell bench press, our second exercise for the day, we might want to work on slightly higher repetitions. So maybe we're going to do 10 reps here, and we're going to use 80 kilos. Then the same thing, we're going to up our sets each week until we are at our maximum recoverable volume, and then now we're going to deload for the last week. So we then have leg extension, our second quadriceps exercise. This one we might work on higher repetitions, maybe in the 10 rep range again, and depending on the machine you're using, let's say for example it's 40 kilos. Again, we're just going to up the sets, keeping the weight the same. And then we have our next pressing exercise. So as this is our 4th exercise, we're probably not going to get the same intensity from lower reps, so we might work in the 12 repetition range. We might say it's 20 kilos. I'm not going to bother doing the accessory stuff, but the concepts are the same. So let's skip day 2 and go straight to day 3. And in this day, we have our upper body exercises first before our lower body exercises. So we might then work with higher intensities for this day. So for the bench press, maybe we'll work in the 6 repetition range, and we're going to up the load. So if we did 80 kilos for 10 reps, maybe we can do 100 kilos for 6 reps. Then the same concept, we're just going to add volume while maintaining the intensity. And then in the deload period, we're going to drop the volume. So with back squats, because we worked at a higher intensity here, we might work at a lower intensity here with higher repetitions. So instead of working the 6 rep range, we might work in the 8 repetition range, and we're obviously going to then drop the load. Second pressing exercise, again, we're going to do slightly higher intensities and slightly lower repetitions. So instead of doing 12s, we might do 10s, and again, we're going to up the weight a little bit. Our second quadriceps exercise, we're going to work, instead of working in the 10 repetition range, we might work slightly higher reps in the 12 repetition range. And again, slightly lower the load, maybe to 30 kilos, depending on the machine you're using. So as we can see here, for our quadriceps, we're starting off with 3, 6, 9, and 12 sets, total sets per muscle group, which falls within that minimum effective volume. And then by the end of the training block, we are doing 5, 10, 15, 20 sets for the quadriceps, which is right within that maximum recoverable volume. Now, depending on the muscle group and your experience with training, maximum recoverable volume may be anywhere within that range. That's just going to come down to experience and trial and error. Same thing with our pressing exercises. So we have 3, 6, 9, 12 sets, which falls within that minimum effective volume, and our maximum recoverable volume. We're doing 20 sets of pressing, which again is sort of in that range where our maximum recoverable volume is. And then if we have a look here in the deload, for our quadriceps, we have 2, 4, 6, 8 sets per muscle group, which is going to fall within that maintenance volume. And again, the rest of the training block, we're basically going from minimum effective volume all the way up to maximum recoverable volume. I'm not going to bother going through the other exercises, but the concepts are the same, essentially going from minimum effective volume to maximum recoverable volume, and then staying at a maintenance volume in the deload period. In the previous video I made, I did recommend that after each training block, you either change up the exercise or work within a different repetition range for each exercise. My views have now changed on that, and I believe that you should stick to the same, at least compound exercises for at least 3 training blocks in a row in order to actually get maximum effectiveness out of that exercise rather than changing too frequently. So every time we do a new training block, we still need to progress in some way. So for example, I have the exact same as the last training block here, but for the next training block, we might keep the exact same exercises, but instead we're going to maybe use the same load and add a repetition if we felt like we could from the last training block. Or another way we could do it, let's say for the bench press, is to keep the same repetitions and sets and simply just add a slight amount of load. That way we're still getting progressive overload, except we're just doing it with the same exercises and we're just progressing each block. With a leg extension, we might, again, up the repetition slightly, just creating a slight amount of overload and continually doing that block to block and really milk as much as we can out of each exercise rather than changing too quickly. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.